Hi guys, welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. No specific topic for tonight, so we kind of have an open Q&A session planned where if you guys don't have any questions, we could probably come up with a few questions because we're not experts. We just like doing this. So, and I don't believe there was a image of the day this week because we didn't have a formal session planned, but we're gonna get back to it next week. Actually, that's my fault. My back went out midweek, and it hurt too much to write a presentation. So there you go. So I'm just gonna really jump right into kind of what I was the few kind of questions that I had, and I see Josh has posted a few more. So we're gonna throw out questions, and when you guys have your questions, feel free to throw them out there. Y'all know Q&A is your spot. Type them in, and they pop up on our screen. And I'm gonna, you know what I'm gonna do since we don't have a specific topic planned. I'm gonna show you what we were just chatting about a few seconds ago. We are watching my guiding, and I know you guys have all done this yourself, but I was explaining I was a little bit disappointed in my recent guiding. I remeshed the other day, and I'm using a Mach 1, so I typically get really flat graphs and really smooth graphs with no spikes. And for some reason, I don't know, it's been sneaking up on me, and I'm sure it's a remesh. But one of these days, we're going to get kind of across how to kind of troubleshoot guiding. But maybe for the benefit of everybody, maybe I'll just go into what I've done. So I noticed the spikes, and I, of course, checked my polar alignment. I've checked my polar alignment like 3 or 4 different times using every different method. The best method, I think, is just to use PhD pointed. Actually, the PhD drift guiding method. You just watch your deck pointed at 2 different spots, and it'll tell you how good your polar alignment is. I also use PhD Lab to analyze my previous guiding log, and oddly enough, one night it told me, I believe it said 1.7 one night. I was off by 1.7 minutes one night on one side of the meridian, and then on the other side of the meridian I was off by 4.5 minutes. And if you ask me my general opinion about the focal length I'm guiding at, I'd say 1.7 minutes is good enough, 4 point something is not. So I was a little bit concerned, and I imaged another night, and I actually didn't even update the thread in Cloudy Nights, but the first night, I have to think about this because I was using subframe selector, and the way subframe selector sorts them is it goes 1, 10, 11, 12, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I believe the first night my first few subs were good, and then it got bad before the meridian flip, and then after the meridian flip most of them were bad. Second night, they started out bad, and then after the meridian flip, they all got good. So I've been watching my guiding graph for the last few nights that I've been imaging and just trying to troubleshoot it, playing around with my settings, and usually if you don't change the settings and your guiding's bad, something else is going on. So I've kind of been looking towards something else. We've been saying maybe it's kind of gritty. Maybe those spiders we all hate have worked their way into my mount. I've got to get in there and clean it out. But that's what I'm doing over the next few days, I guess. Just troubleshoot.
Hey, Adam, it's good to see that you're using the development build there, because that's got the new icons I designed down the bottom with the new brain and the new PhD logo.
Yes, thank you for that. Thank you for that.
No worries. I hope it doesn't jar people too much. But I wonder if it is something to do with it being the dev build. Have you tried rolling back to the last one? Was it better with the last one?
Let me think about that. No, or I shouldn't say no, definitely, because I didn't try guiding with my edge on the last build. But I did notice my guiding getting slightly worse with the William optics, and I'm off-axis guiding. At the time, I was thinking to myself, well, maybe it's just the shorter focal length, and the guiding is just having a little bit more difficulty. But I actually haven't rolled back and tried it with this particular telescope configuration. That's a good point. I could give that a try. I might even have, well, no, it installs over this, right? So I would have to roll back. it's a good point. I might try that tomorrow if I can get something out of it. We'll see.
Yeah, I know with those sorts of numbers and the total error, if I was getting that with my Hyperstar setup, which is so wide, I'd be really, really quite happy.
Yeah.
But I know you guys are a bit more high mag, so it could probably get a bit better than that, definitely.
Yeah, I've been asked this before, and I tend to get 0.3 to 0.4 seconds total error. And I think with the Edge, that's about where I have to be to not be hurting myself. I don't know. I've heard I've heard you want your total error to be a third of your arcsecs per pixel, but I don't know if I could quite get that. I've had it drop down to 2, but that seems a little bit difficult. But I'd love to try. And you can see now, just watching my guiding, it's fighting. The deck is fighting. The RA is doing a little bit better, but seems to be fighting with the mount a little bit. So that's a good point, Dylan. Thank you, though, for the new icons and the new buttons, because they're actually a lot better.
Thanks very much. There's actually color in that brain now.
Yes, yes. Yeah, that was actually my primary reason for upgrading. I saw that you did them, and I was like, oh, okay. Well, this is nice. But we'll see. Maybe that was a mistake.
Yeah, see how you go. That classic sort of curve where it goes up and down in the graph, and you can see that they are fighting against each other, is something I struggle with sometimes as well. And I have had luck with PhD for no logical reason, just jumping in and setting up a new profile and getting it to just generate new darks and setting up everything with the defaults again and then tweaking from there. And sometimes that just fixes stuff for me.
You know, it's interesting you say that, because first of all, many thanks to the entire PhD2 crew, but I have noticed funky behavior before. And it just that's a good point, that there could be something, I don't know, either corrupted, or maybe it's not getting a setting that it thinks it's getting. You'll notice my max deck and max RA are very high, and I never remember having to keep them that high. So it's I'm definitely gonna have to check a few things out, and that profile, that's a good idea about the profile. And I am so rather than have you all stare at guiding, what's it been, 7 minutes now, and we're staring at my guiding. Rather than have you all stare at the guiding, I'm just gonna go. First, I'll take back my screen. I think I'll take back my screen, and yeah. So I'm gonna toss it around the room here, because a few of us use PI, a few of us use Photoshop, and my first question is, what is your noise reduction method, and when are you doing it? And I actually think we're going to get a really diverse set of answers. I don't think everyone's going to answer this the same. So anyone, I don't know if I'm not going to call anyone out. Whoever jumps in first, you're welcome to share. But first, let me say it. I have been using mostly TGVD noise, and for some reason I feel like, whereas I was really doing well with the tool, for some reason now I feel like I'm losing it, and my images have more noise than they should based off the quality of the data that I'm putting into it. It's hard coming off a dim object like the last one we were doing, but now even with my edge on some narrowband stuff, I've been noticing that. But I use TGVD noise, and I tend to use it later in the process. I've been experimenting linear. It works linear or nonlinear. But I'm still, I think that's one step behind the new school, where linear noise reduction with MLT for the PI guys, multi-scale linear transform might be a little bit better. But I'm still one of those noise reduction late in the process. Don't kill any data before it's too early when it's too early to, or too late to get it back.
Well, Adam, I'm probably the least analytical.
Go ahead, Eric. Yeah.
So, and the laziest too. So I like the laziest, quickest, and most automated process. So what I usually do is I follow Harry's AstroShed Atrius wavelets, and I set it up just the way he describes it, and I do that on basically all linear objects once I've done the calibration, stacking, and and I have an image to work with. And I have only analyzed it kind of visually, and it seems to me that I lose nothing, and I get rid of a lot of the noise by doing that in the linear. Now that being said, once I get all through the PQinsight processes that I use, which is to TIFF image, which I then roll into Photoshop to do the fine work, I then use noiseware if the image requires it. And I try to use the least destructive level in the noiseware utility to get rid of it without generating the artifacts that you can generate when you do noise reduction. And that's my process. And that is definitely the lazy man's way of doing it, because I just pre-program in PQinsight, and the noiseware has its own routine. And I have no idea how that works. So, oh.
There you go. And do you do a layer at a time, or does it use the noise thresholding?
For which? In Photoshop?
No, in or excuse me, a wavelet layer at a time in PQinsight.
If you followed Harry's procedure, you set up all the layers at once, and then you just drag it onto your image.
Okay.
And I always do a visual comparison once I do that to make sure I haven't done anything too nasty. And it just really smooths out the background. I don't lose any stars. I don't generate any artifacts. And it's really not that aggressive on the linear image. On the non-linear image, it's in Photoshop.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Eric.
I'd be happy to hop in on my Photoshop method now. So I've gotten to the point now where I tone map every single picture, whether it's a galaxy or a nebula or anything. So the only time that I will use noise reduction is at the end of tone mapping my different channels. And for my luminance, I don't use any kind of noise reduction anymore. So I will finish my tone map channels, I'll combine them and make a color image. And then I process that to get the color where I want it and the saturation where I want it. And then at the very end of that, I will do a little bit of a noise reduction before bringing in the luminance or the synthetic luminance, whatever I choose to do. Sometimes, instead of so the noise reduction tools I like are either Noise Ninja or the Deep Sky noise reduction tools. And what I'll do is I'll just, anytime I use those, I use them at like 25 to 50% opacity and just use inverted mask so that it's only being applied to the dark areas. And so, like I said, that's at the very end of the tone mapped color combination. And then when I bring in the luminance or synthetic luminance, whatever it is, I will not use noise reduction anymore after that. I don't mind it that much, but what I really hate is what it does to the stars. And watching some images that pop up, on Astrobin and Flickr and stuff, just when you can see when people use a lot of noise reduction, the stars get killed. And I've grown to the point where I just don't think it's worth it. I'd rather see a little bit of like high frequency noise on a real small scale than to see anything that destroys the stars. The other thing that I once in a while will use are color blotch removal, because that's the noise that bothers me probably more than anything. Is whenever there's kind of, usually it shows itself as dark blue color blotches in people's background. And if you have that, then my opinion is you probably stretch too far, or you need more data. And so once that starts showing up, I don't think there's a very good way to get rid of that. Some people desaturate it to try to deal with that noise, but then you just get this kind of monochrome background splotchiness. But then the last point I'll bring up about that is if I'm really struggling with the noise in the sky background, what I'll tend to do if I feel like I can't beat it is I will grab something from very early in the processing, for my sky background before I've stretched it over and over, and I will actually blend that background in with the end of the image background because it's got a very smooth profile that hasn't been stretched very far. So you can kind of combine that. If you can just bring it up if it's very gradient free, then you can do a good job of just bringing up 1 or 2 ADU on average above the fully processed pictures sky background. Then you can blend that in and kind of help smooth it out a little bit. So that's kind of been where I'm at here recently.
Actually, I'm surprised we don't hear about whether it's synthetic backgrounds or unstretched backgrounds, or it seems like a good technique. I've created synthetic backgrounds and used either lighten or darken mode to hide or reveal portions of it, and it cleans it up. It kills fine detail, but if you're late in the process, it's almost beyond that point.
I would say it only kills fine detail if it's very close to the ADU count of whatever that detail is, at least for me. And I don't know that synthetic's the right word. I would just say earlier backgrounds, because it still is your background, and in a way it's even more natural because it hasn't been stretched very far. But it's very challenging to get the transition from the sky to the kind of faint transition outer dust of the galaxy or the nebula. So you have to kind of work on good feathering masks and make sure that you're very gradient free. Otherwise, you'll never get it to work.
And that's Carboni's tools you're using, right? Deep space noise reduction.
It's deep space noise reduction and space noise reduction. I actually probably use space noise reduction a little more now because to me it's a little bit less aggressive. And as you know, I try to just get tons of data so that I don't have to use much noise reduction, if any at all. But the deep space one is very good if you've got a lot of noise. If you don't have much noise, then I recommend the space noise reduction instead. It just doesn't seem nearly as aggressive.
And then you blend it in using normal mode, or which mode do you use to blend it in? Because I think you said you blend it, you don't use it 100%, right?
I just use an inverted mask,
okay,
and then I'll blend it in at usually like a 25 to 50% opacity.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's my kind of follow-up technique when I need it. But yeah, I see someone else trying. Dylan maybe chiming in right now. I see he pulled up an image.
Yeah, you guys are like way more advanced than I am with the PQinsight stuff and noise reduction. But I've got a super quick example of that inverted layer mask that Josh was just talking about. Just a quick little trick that I do in Photoshop. Sometimes at the end of the process as well, before I bump the saturation just a little bit. But here's a super noisy image that I took the other night. It's only 35 minutes of data, so just excuse the the poor quality. But you can see here this layer. Don't know if you can see that, but if I switch it on and off, you can sort of see how the noise kind of smooths out a bit. So what I'd do here is I would just copy this whole layer and make a new layer, and then put your layer mask on it. Hold down Alt, paste it in, and then invert it. And if we go back, if we hold Alt down again and hit it, and then I would do a noise median, and you can sort of play with this one with the pixels, with the radius here to smooth it. Oops, I'm on the wrong thing. Just hit back there. Filter, noise, median. And
now we're actually not seeing the window. I think that you have open. We see your photograph and what.
Okay, yeah.
But you're gonna have to be a little bit descriptive with the buttons you're clicking.
Sure. So it gives me radius, and I can set that from 0 to whatever or 1 to whatever. So I'll set it just to something extreme here, just to for the example's sake. So that smooths it out quite a lot. And I've got my mask here, and if I hit levels, then I can drag in the sliders on those levels to bring the stars back, a lot or a little. So it tends to just pop those stars back in nice and sharp, but keep the background. It kind of takes that model away a little bit. So it's not a great noise reduction technique, but it's something that I use almost every image. And I'm starting with PQinsight now to do that morphological adjustment to reduce the stars a bit. But this is a kind of poor man's way to do it as well.
Hey Dylan, one other suggestion I have for that while you have this open and are playing with it, on your inverted mask, run a minimum filter of maybe like 1.5 pixels, and run a minimum filter of about 1.5 pixels, and then put about a 1.5 or 2 pixel Gaussian blur on it, and then bring your white point over to the left just a little bit.
Okay, I'm doing that now. Blur Gaussian, I've done the minimum. there's the Gaussian, and then bring in the histogram.
Bring in the histogram, the white point, other way. Bring the white point over
Yep.
to the left a little bit, so the background's more white. There you go. So
Gotcha. Yep.
to me, this hits more of that noise, and it touches less of the stars.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think I've been doing that in PixInsight with my. This is almost good for another question, but for HDR MT, I think HDR multi-scale transform for well, not necessarily sharpening. What is it? Histogram equalization or histogram.
Local histogram.
Local histogram equalization.
Yeah, yeah. And where you're really trying to target stuff. So I use convolution to get rid of the stars, and I've been kind of blurring it and playing with it that way. Not quite the PixInsight method, but an interesting way to just kind of target exactly what you want to hit by blurring out stars or just getting rid of them. Almost like performing a tone map on your mask.
Yeah, I think my version is much different from everyone else's. I do it on the linear data, and I use a combination of TGV and MMT, multi-scale median transform, for the noise reduction. I don't know if I... Yeah, so I kind of have some processes I put together. So if I take I'll start off by cloning an image, and I do some stretching and clipping on this. To make a mask, right? And this allows me to control how I apply it. And it's pretty straightforward. All I'm really doing is I take an image and I do a screen transfer function on it. So it's a linear data. I stretch it, and then I take this guy and I do a curves adjustment if I need to bolster the change here. You know, I can increase the contrast however I want, and then ultimately I want to blend some of my noise reduced portion of my image in here, and so I can control how much I blend in parts of the signal, whether it's the background or the main parts of the image, the objects. I can control how much gets blended in. So this is kind of my blending mask, and then I do the noise reduction on a separate image, and that's a combination of TGV, so it actually won't take too long to run it. So I like what TGV does with the small scale noise. I'm not sure if this is really visible or not, but there's kind of a lumpiness in the background, and so I use MMT to kind of kill that, to even out the lumpiness. So again, I take another mask that I create, and this guy kind of just leaves open those areas where it's lumpy, and then I apply a multi-scale median transform that's really aggressive on the noise reduction settings. But because my mask is so strong, it doesn't really do too much to the image except even out those background areas.
Hey David, while you're doing that,
yeah,
I've struggled using stuff like this on very nebulous pictures, and I haven't found a good way to kind of differentiate the kind of lumpiness of the background with the lumpiness and the nebulous structure itself.
Yeah, that's a really difficult one, especially when you have like a dark nebula that's actually darker than the background.
Right.
So the best thing I can do is recommend that you do it in stages where you isolate a particular scale. So for example, to create this mask, I'll go back to the raw data here. So essentially all I did was I did a multi-scale median transform, and I just left the 4, 5, and 6 layers active and disabled everything else, and that gives me this kind of modeled mess, right? But if I look at the structure of all the modeling I have in my image after TGV, it's about on that order. Smaller than that, I start, killing too much, and larger than that, I start, blurring actual structures. If you have structures that are of that size, then I would actually use a clone stamp or something to actually paint those guys out so that those aren't hit. So very much like you would do in Photoshop, you can use a paintbrush to actually kill the noise reduction in certain areas.
Adam, are you cringing over there? You're muted.
No, I'm not cringing. I'm paying close attention because this is, I don't know, I get that modeling too. And
sorry, go ahead.
Well, I see the way he does the initial protection on the initial mask, and I actually think Hytham does that as well. He's in the room. And I'm just thinking about it, and it's kind of, if you're working on linear data and you use a mask like that, then it probably allows you to work a lot more delicately, which I think is the problem I've had on linear data. Does that make sense? Like kind of a delicate way. You're using the mask almost to represent the luminance of it?
Yeah, you're really using the masks to limit what all the noise reduction is working on, right? Mm. And by using really strong masks, you really limit it to very small increases in noise reduction just to the areas that you want to target.
I have a question too. One thing that PixInsight is better at doing is binarizing data that I have not found a good way to do in Photoshop yet, which I would love to figure that out, but I haven't found that. Do you know of a way to do that?
To binarize data?
Yeah. Like particularly maybe for star masks.
Hmm.
I've created an action which basically just increases the contrast and brightness over and over until it gets binarized, and then I apply a Gaussian blur to it, and it's pretty good. Like, so I use that maybe sometimes for boosting the color in stars or for making sure I don't touch stars at all. But I haven't found a good way to actually binarize data without using pixel math.
Yeah, I don't know how you might do that in Photoshop. I mean, in PixInsight, there's just image binarize,
right?
Which does a split, I think, at 50%.
Right. So sometimes I'll actually do that in PixInsight to bring over to Photoshop because it's just a lot easier than running through that action. And you can set that level if you write your own equation at whatever value you want, so that you're not playing around right at like the background ADU value.
I guess you could use levels, bring in the white and black points.
And I've tried that to some success, but nothing as well as PixInsight.
Yeah. Yeah, the pixel math and the processes just give you a lot more control over that sort of thing.
Adam?
Yes.
I don't really follow hardly anything of what's being described in Pixel, so far. So for those of us that are basically mathematical dunces, I'm reverting back to showing an example of the Atrius wavelets, which I've screen shared. And as far as I can tell, it doesn't do anything for the stars, but as you can see, I don't know if you can see the amount of background that's been decreased in there.
Yes.
It's very easy. It's very quick. As long as you do it on linear data, not nonlinear data, it's a good starting point for noise reduction. And you know how I like to bring out nebulosity, and if it killed any of the nebulosity, I would be against it. But it seems to work just fine. So I'm just sharing this screen for anyone that's interested.
Hey Eric, is this SRO data?
Yes, it is.
Your SRO data does not count for noise reduction for what we do here in the real world. It's way too smooth and easy to deal with.
No, but I have used this from the beginning. Since I started with PixInsight, that was one of the first tools that I used when, a good year before I got any SRO data. This happens to be 6946 that we're just working on luminosity. But you see the same thing, whether it's HA data RGB luminosity or whatever. And it's just a very gentle way of getting rid of some background noise. Unless you like background noise, which I don't. Because once you do this, then it's very easy to just, since the background is much more uniform, to kind of get rid of that uniform background, which I don't like, and bring out those contrasting areas. But as Dennis Miller says, that's just my opinion. I may be wrong.
On these images, it looks like it works very well, like because you can still see the faint structure behind, or right in front of it.
Yeah, that's one of the outer arms of 6946 that you see on the right side.
Interesting. Yeah, we've seen a lot of good methods. I'm kind of committing myself to learning better noise reduction because I thought I was getting it for a while, and now I don't know. I'm not comfortable with where I am at it. And these days, I feel like going into Photoshop and using deep space noise reduction doesn't. I know I can get more control out of PixInsight. So I'm not really. It's not that I just want to use PixInsight for it. I just, when I run deep space noise reduction, I say, oh, I'm losing that. I'm losing that. I wish I could do it like 25% as much, and that's where I have difficulties. But
yeah, see, I would personally just argue against the point that you made, just saying that PixInsight does it better. I think Photoshop still has the same level of capabilities. It's just a matter of how you go about employing those. So I use similar methods to what Josh had talked about earlier, and something similar to what Dylan had posted up. Just by copying and pasting the original image, creating a new layer, then creating a reveal all mask, pasting it into there, reversing it or inverting it. But then what you could do next after that is, you know what, maybe I should just share what I'm talking about. Give me 2 seconds here while I bring it up. I can just show you an example of a recent NGC 7023 image I was working on. The noise on it isn't bad at all. I collected it in a blue zone. But you can use invert mask then to protect very specific areas, but you can also adjust the output slider on the levels itself. That will give you, and tell me if you guys can see what I'm doing here. There should be an image of NGC 7023 up on the screen.
I don't see the image, but I see your screen.
Boo.
Just try sharing your whole screen.
Try full screen.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do here. Screen share. Screen share. There we go. Let's go full screen 1.
There you go.
You guys can see it? All right, cool. So this was just a recent image I've been working on. If we zoom in real close, the noise on it isn't too bad. There's some really odd color fringing because I decided to bin the data early on, which was not smart at all. So this is my typical noise reduction employs just this method here. So I just create a new layer, Control A, Control C. We create a reveal all mask. Now to get into the reveal all mask, you just hold down the Alt button, right, and left click in there. We paste it, which is Control V, Control I, then to invert the mask. Now one of the things that I like to do while I'm inside the mask, because you can see that some of the dust here is protected. But what I'd like to do is I want to protect this area a little bit better, say around NGC 7023, specifically around the iris. There are a couple ways you could do it. One, you could do the wonderful cheat method by selecting B here, selecting our brush. You can set it to the black because we want to hide it. So you could just paint over it like that, which I don't typically recommend. The other way of doing it is you can still do it that way, but adjust the opacity or the flow or the opacity of the brush here, and you can paint it in so it's not as strong, so it's still applied. Still apply a cover-up mask, but to a lesser extent, which is still not my favorite way. The other way I do it typically is I just bring up the levels output. And I start making adjustments to the levels output here. Just slide it on down, give a little bit of protection, make some slight adjustments. So you could do it this way. You could leave it at that. But the next step that I tend to do is I just take this output slider and then just start making modifications to it. So this is similar to what I have done in the past with PixInsight. And I think David, you just mentioned you do this yourself, is when you take the mask itself, you just make changes to the intensity of the mask itself, so you just provide a nice uniform gray across the image. So that way you don't have, the white background is being hit extremely hard. You can still modify it here ever so slightly and say, well, I'd like a nice uniform gray image. So we leave it there as an example. From there, what I do is I use oops, there we go. We can go to Filter, ImageNomic, Noiseware. I love this particular utility. So if you click on the screen, you can see the before and then the after, the before and the after. And it gives you the ability to specify, every single one of the frequencies into what amount, or at least what amount of noise reduction you want to apply to each one of them. And I like this program a lot. So what I dislike, though, is the fact that it will not show you what the noise reduction will look like with the mask employed. It drives me kind of nuts. So I just click on OK, goes through, go in really tight here. And you can see that the object itself has been protected fairly well. And then, like Josh does, sometimes if I don't like it, I'll just do the opacity levels here and just set it a little bit lower, just because I don't want too heavy of a noise reduction in the background. And that's what I tend to do.
One thing while you're in Photoshop that I'm surprised I haven't heard anyone talk about doing is I will frequently actually do noise reduction to my masks before using the masks as a mask for that layer. So I'll treat it like its own picture and then do noise reduction on that.
Yep.
So that it even smooths out more, so your application of noise reduction is more uniform.
Yeah, absolutely. So the other thing, and that's a good point that I didn't bring up, so sometimes what I'll do, so if we go back into the mask, the other thing that I'd like to do is you go to Filter, Noise, and then Dust and Scratches, set it to 1 and 1, just to eliminate that extremely small pixelated noise in the background, so it gives you a nice smooth. That's the other way I've done it.
And despeckle.
Or yep. Yeah, there's a lot of different things that you can employ. Sometimes I'll even do that right immediately after I've applied the main noise reduction against this image.
Eric, I'm hitting you.
Yeah, I was hearing my voice feedback, thank you. So even just coming into this image here and doing, well, I would apply a mask, but say Dust and Scratches 1 layer, but you typically don't want to do this without a mask, is the other thing that I've started to do. I went a little nuts on one of my last images, and I was mad at myself for even going that far with noise reduction, but that's the other way I do it. So I would argue, just to Adam's point, that yeah, sometimes I think Photoshop also offers the same level of flexibility, just in an easier format, in my opinion.
I also enjoy the real-time preview of it.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that, but that tool is not part of the Photoshop package, right?
No, yes, you're right. ImageNomic is entirely separate, like Noise Ninja would be. I think it's about, I think $75 is what I paid for ImageNomics.
That's not bad.
Yeah.
Let me put another vote in for that utility. I find it, the noise reduction very effective, mass or otherwise.
Yeah, it's an awesome tool. One of the things that I hate about it, and I'll just go back into it, is you got to be really careful with the sharpening. And there's a certain great individual that uses it, and you can see what it does to the stars there. So if you don't mask out your stars carefully, it over sharpens the stars and it makes them look really bright and punchy and gross, as you can see in my image there. It's also got this contrast adjustment. I tend to leave these two alone because if I'm going to sharpen, I'll go right back into either Photoshop and use high pass filter, or more appropriately, take it back into PixInsight. Then you can use the extract wavelet layers utilities and focus on the layers that you want, and then you can go into ATWT, at your wavelets, and then sharpen the specific layers with, of course, the appropriate mask to protect your stars. But yeah, stay away from the. I tend to not like this option in ImageNomic.
What question?
Yeah, hi, I was going to say that your point about the way I was handling the mask is exactly right. It's the same type of thing that you're doing there in Photoshop, and I think you're right. I mean, the controls are a little bit easier to use in in Photoshop, in terms of making adjustments to the levels and things like that. But ultimately, I think it comes down to how you use the tool and what works best for you, right?
No, I agree. And one thing I love about PixInsight, and I'll never take, because and I repeat this to everybody, I'm a techie all the way through and through, and I absolutely love pixel math. For me, it's just a matter of ease of use. But I love the flexibility that PixInsight offers if you have the technical capabilities to get into it and use it, like such as yourself, David. It's a fantastic utility, and I don't want to scare people away from making that statement. You don't have to be a technical genius to use it, but it definitely helps to take the most advantage of it.
Or have friends like David.
Or have friends like David, yes, absolutely.
One thing that we haven't discussed that I always find interesting is that I actually prefer a little bit of high-frequency noise in the background. And I think everyone has their differing opinions on this, but I prefer it so much to the extent that sometimes, even without doing noise reduction, my background looks too smooth, and so I'll put in maybe a 0.5% Gaussian noise addition on it. And I don't know how you guys feel, but I'm curious what you think about it.
Yeah, I've done that exact same thing before, Josh, where I realized I kind of overdid the noise reduction a little bit. It's just a little too smooth, and so yeah, I'll add in either a Gaussian or Poisson distribution noise into the image again.
I do the exact same thing. I just use the add noise utility, or the noise generator utility in PixInsight. You can also do it in Photoshop with the appropriate mask as well.
Yeah, especially when stuff gets a little bit blotchy, it's just I think it helps remove that blotchy appearance a little bit.
Yeah, when I went overboard with my cave bubble mosaic, because I don't know why it got in my head that I just couldn't stand the noise that was in the background, even though it was a nice Gaussian distribution. I had the inkling just to push it too far, and I went back after the fact, just extracted the luminance, or I think I used the existing luminance. Either way, made some slight changes to the levels on the luminance, applied it to the image, then Gaussian blur.
Yeah, that's
whoops.
Yeah, Gaussian noise. That's my favorite part about the Sony sensors, especially on the new luminance or HA data that I've been getting, is that its noise actually presents itself as just a very smooth Gaussian noise in the background. So I almost prefer just not to do any noise reduction and then use that at the end, and it gives it kind of that very uniform but just slightly noisy look.
Okay, we've got some questions in Q&A. Oh yeah, go ahead, Devin. Go ahead and ask. Go ahead and ask your questions. We'll definitely come up to them. And Chris, we just purchased the SkyX Pro with the camera add-on and T-point. I would like some advice on workflow using the SkyX and the Celestron CGEM DX. Should we do an alignment in Next Remote before starting calibration run in T-point? Ooh. I have used a Celestron mount, but I don't use the SkyX. Anyone in the room uses the SkyX with the Celestron mount? That's going to be a tough one to answer.
Yeah, I don't know that we have anyone here that's using the SkyX.
No, and I just don't. I don't even know the. I don't even know the routine when you're using the SkyX with the Paramount. At what point you're homing or anything like that. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Devin's new question. Pretty set on getting a new mount, but just disappeared. Pretty set on getting a new mount, but I'm not 100% sure on which to get. I'm thinking a Skywatcher EQ6, though I'm not sure there's a big advantage on spending a little more to get the Azimuth EQ version. Now, if I get that and an auto-guiding setup, with that I really can't get anything else. The problem is my current setup is the Canon with my edges producing resolution I can't hope to satisfy VidDeepa. So I think you're asking, is the EQ6 mount a good mount, or is there an advantage to getting the Azimuth EQ version? I'm not familiar. First of all, I have never used either of those mounts. Is the EQ6 mount the one that's the same as the?
It's an Atlas.
It's an Atlas.
Well, actually, the new ones though all have the belts built into them, so they are. The Skywatcher, the new Skywatches have the belts built in, so I would actually recommend those over the regular Atlas at this point.
Right, that's true.
And they're also less expensive than the regular Atlas at this point.
And how's the quality? Do you guys know about the Azimuth EQ mounts? I'm guessing they are the ones that are like crossovers.
Yeah, it's the one that you can turn to an Alt-Az setup.
Yeah, my initial, I have no experience with them, so initially I'm gonna think maybe I'd be reluctant to say it'd be as good as maybe a straight out gem, but I'm just saying that because I don't know.
I've got the EQ6 myself, and I have to say it is an awesome mount. It's just improved everything I do a lot, and I'm sure the next model up would be great as well. The real advantage I found with it is that you can bypass the hand controller completely and go and use EQ Mod and Astro Tortilla, which is both open source and free software, and that has completely changed the game for me because it turns my telescope into a robot, where it just goes, I say in Stellarium, just point here, and it goes there, and then plate sols, and then recenters, so I don't have to do any alignment at all. And that sort of automation has meant that I can stay inside where it's nice and warm. It's a really, and it's a tank. It's a really heavy mount and tripod. It's it's kind of nice if you've got a little bit of breeze. It's very forgiving.
I think there's a second part to Devin's question, which is, should he go in the direction of the mount, or should he do something on the image, the CCD side? And I think to answer that, we need to understand what he's got now. Right.
But and one more point to that, whether or not to get the Alt-Az version or just the regular EQ version, the Alt-Az version is the one that has the belt drive. The regular EQ6 SynScan does not have the belt version, so I think that it is worth going to the Alt-Az version as well.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking. I know there's another crossover mount of a different company that I was thinking it was similar, but
the Atlas Pro.
Oh, the Atlas Pro is a crossover?
Yeah, I believe the I think it's the EQ 8. Let me double check this. If I'm saying it right.
That's not the EQ8. That's the HDX 110 Orion branded one.
That's the Atlas Pro.
All right. Yeah, some good answers. And if or a quicker optic.
Yeah. So Devin, what are you using now for your mount?
Mm-hmm. That'd be the key question we need answered to help you out.
So we got one from Bobby Gross through text message asking, what mounts do you think would work well in an observatory?
What mounts would work well in an observatory?
Here comes the bias.
Yeah, I know.
We're all guilty of it.
Well, let's start by addressing, looking at it instead of a per mount basis, looking at the needs that you have. And so one of the things that I've always been hesitant to do with my Atlas is to really trust it kind of remotely. So I wouldn't run it while I'm traveling to Pittsburgh down in Florida because I just don't feel as comfortable doing that with the Atlas. While I think it will give good enough tracking performance, I do think that having something, if you're going to run it remotely, that has some sort of protection built in would make me feel better. So that's my first point when I would look at it.
Yeah, I think I would say, if you want a really good observatory setup, you probably want something with some sort of homing and something that has built-in backlash compensation. Outside of that, I don't know that you want anything, anything specific in the mounts.
So for backlash compensation, do the AP mounts have that?
The AP mounts, they do have. I mean, you can use backlash compensation. They have a backlash training routine that's in PemPro that I guess you could use. I think in general they're intended to be machined pretty backlash free. I mean they're pretty smooth, except for mine tonight. But actually, typically, and I think over the past, paramounts tend to be the most sought after for remote observatories. First, because they're bulletproof and they have a great, just a great reputation for running remote. But the homing sensor, so that what you actually do is you press a button and the mount knows where it is.
So that's for true remote observatories where that would come in important, right?
For true remote, yeah.
That's true. That's what I was assuming. I forgot to ask whether it's really remote or just backyard.
More backyard observatory is, I know, is his question. And just to hit on the point that you made about the backlash compensation, I'm assuming that's because something like the Atlas, where you have to bias it east heavy with the weights, would be difficult to do if it is an observatory, and you wouldn't want to have to go out and flip the weights around whenever you flip the meridian.
Yeah, it's less on the RA than it is on the deck, right? When you swing around and change things.
Yes. Yeah. So the AP has tight enough backlash that you don't have to worry about biasing your weight.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can have the mount fairly imbalanced too. It's their philosophy has been more around try to get the mechanical aspects of the component so tight that you don't need the software in order to correct it, which is interesting since they've released APCC to work in conjunction with the product itself. So it seems like two contradicting statements, but I think their argument might be, and of course, don't take my statement as exactly what they're thinking because I am in no way affiliated with these guys. But I think they would probably argue that it's just an enhancement to their current product suite, but who knows?
And with so the paramounts were always good because they had homing sensors, and now with the absolute encoders on the APs, they act as homing sensors. So or actually, I shouldn't even say that, they're even better than homing sensors because you don't have to home. It always knows where it's pointing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's and then in conjunction with APCC, you can do unguided imaging. But these are more advanced features in premium mounts. So I think we might, depending on what you're looking at for your observatory, oh, and I'm looking through the thing for the question. It came in via text message, right?
Yeah.
Depending on what type of mount you're looking for, it could be a number of different things.
I think that the EQ8s have, well, I know that they have encoders now. I'm not sure if the Atlas Pros have encoders.
The encoders on the EQ8s are low precision encoders. They're not the very high precision, sub-arc second precision ones.
Right, so you wouldn't be using them for unguided imaging, but you could use them to get yourself back to home.
Right.
Interesting. I always wonder why AP doesn't put a simple, cheap homing sensor just on the axes of their mounts, but...
Yeah, because they said a little while ago that they had the ability by monitoring the gear wheel and always knowing the position, but it's something that I'm still waiting on. Mechanical stops, to me, are even way better than a homing sensor, in my opinion, because if you get that one bad slew, at least you got a mechanical stop that will just stop you. Because it happened to me the other day where there's a bug in one of the firmware revisions of astrophysics mounts in the AP1100. And I was running just a simple test in my remote observatory. Thankfully, I had it on camera, and it was on one side of the meridian. So it was on the west side facing east, and it was about to do a meridian flip to the east side. And looking at the log files in the ASCOM log file, it said it knew exactly where it was. It said counterweights up, west side of the pier, plate solve knew exactly where it was, and when it decided to flip over to the other side, I watched it go straight down to go east. It's a known bug in the U firmware. So everyone listening out there, if you got the U firmware revision on your astrophysics mount, freaking change it now. Yesterday. Don't run your mount. So thankfully I caught it and hit the stop button before anything went bad and replaced the chip immediately. That's where I think mechanical stops would be awesome. And APCC. So if you have APCC, or at least if you have an astrophysics mount, get APCC. It helps avoid those things.
So I think Devin came in with his answer, and Tolga's got a question now too. So it looks like Devin's using an AVX.
AVX with an Edge HD 8-inch. It's a tough setup to run, and I don't know how much luck you've been having with it. A lot of people are running that setup. because Celestron sells the two together. And I'm not going to say it's an unworkable setup. It's a difficult setup, though. If you've got a good version of the AVX mount, then maybe it's perfectly fine. But in the kind of typical, I'll say, starter mounts, the Edge is going to push it a lot for that. So if you decide you want to continue using the Edge, then I'm going to say upgrade your mount. I upgraded my mount because I had an Edge and I just wanted to keep using it. If you were more looking to do wide field work, then you can probably get away with the AVX. I don't know exactly what you think you want to do. My inclination would be to probably say consider a wide field refractor for the AVX. I don't know how much experience you have, but a wide field refractor on the AVX, you're going to get some pretty good pictures. If you buy it soon, you're going to be in season. You're going to get a lot of Cygnus, and there's a lot of large, nice targets up there. I don't know whether your camera's modified, so that might have something to do with it, whether it being in season, because a lot of the larger targets are H-alpha. But then again, Andromeda's coming up too, so there's some galaxies as well. If you choose to upgrade your mount, you're gonna need to get a good mount. With the Edge, you might need an off-axis guider. It's something to consider. That's not a big, it's not a big investment like it used to be. I think you can get a good off-axis guider for $200, and then a good guide camera for it for about $350 or so. But it depends on what you want to do with it.
Yeah, he also says that he's been having issues since he bought the AVX.
Okay, yeah. These things don't pop up in order. I don't get it.
Yeah, that's really annoying.
I see it move, and then I can't find the question. Well, if you're using the Edge on the AVX, it's a really tough setup to get working. You know, the AVX is the starter mount that's pretty much imaging capable, but I think you're going to have success if you're using a wide field refractor. And an Edge HD is about as long as focal length gets for imagers before you get into professional gear, before you get into needing premium mounts.
That's what, a 2-meter focal length on that thing, right?
Yeah, it's 2032. If you have a focal reducer on it, you're going to do yourself some favors. You're going to bring it down to 1400. But look, I'm using you just saw my Edge HD on my Mach 1, and I've got 0.7 RMS error in both axes, 0.92 RMS error right now in both axes, although it is looking smooth right now. Who knows? This is with the premium mount. I should be getting better, but this is impacting my images. So you're not going to be getting the most out of your telescope with that mount. You're going to have to spend a lot of money to get the most out of that telescope. It may be better to go wide field, get your feet wet. Again, I don't know how much experience. All I know now is that you have which equipment you have and that you've been having some troubles. So typically for a beginner, if that's what you are, if you're not a beginner, I apologize, but if you're a beginner, wide field refractors are great. You're going to get good images right off the bat. You're going to get round stars right off the bat that are workable. If your stars aren't round, stacking may not work properly, you're really not going to be able to get into it. You're not going to be able to get into the really exciting stuff if you're fighting your mount.
Just to throw in my 2 cents, we often talk about this with people who are starting probably once or twice a week on the forums. And my recommendation is always if you're trying to get into it on a budget, is a Sirius and an 80mm refractor, or even better would be an AT65 or William Optics Star 71, because they have the flatteners built in. You don't have to worry about spacing or anything. You can just hook up your camera and start imaging with it, which to me is nicer for somebody who's just getting going. You don't have to worry about a lot of external things that you normally would have to.
Yeah, and Josh's point about the Sirius is a good one. I mean, the AVX is fine, but it doesn't have deck bearings where the Sirius does. So, in terms of guiding and correcting the deck axis, you're going to get better results with the Sirius mount. But if you're looking for a mount upgrade in general, it's probably better to go to the EQ6 or the AZEQ version.
There's also a EQ5 version if you don't want to put in quite that investment that has the belt drive as well, I believe. Let me just double check that one here.
I thought the EQ5 was the equivalent of the Sirius.
Yeah, the AZEQ5.
I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah, so the AZEQ5. Let me make sure that this one has a belt drive before I say that as well.
Tom G, quick answer to your question. No, I was not able to get that 152. It was on Craigslist, actually, and it's not on Craigslist any longer. So.
Yeah, the AZEQ5 does have the belt drive. I think that would be a huge upgrade from the AVX. And just to mention this, because we've said belt drive a bunch of times here for people, one of the there's a couple advantages to the belt drive. One is that it is well, it's quieter. So I don't know if you care about being quieter or not, but the one of the big ones is it removes a lot of the backlash in your system. So whenever you're guiding or you're taking an image and the scope is bouncing back and forth on deck or RA, the belt drive can help eliminate a lot of that. For people who own the old Atlases or Sirius mounts, you can buy a belt upgrade kit from Rowan Engineering, and to me it's made a huge difference. I've probably gone 2 years now without having to throw out a sub due to bad tracking with reasonable total length systems on it ever since I made that change. It also reduces a little bit of your high frequency noise in your guiding.
Tolga is asking how long do you have to expose for the 3nm filters, but at the top there I see for focus. So these questions are jumping around on me. And 3nm narrowband filters. How long do you have to expose? Well, with narrowband, I mean, you should pretty much, with a 3nm filter, you should expose as long as you can, or as long as you really need to for the specific target. But you're trying to get yourself away from the read noise, which is just really difficult. Those of you guys with 3nm filters, how long are you guys exposing?
To focus through them?
Well, actually, let's answer it in two parts because I'm not sure whether he was talking about focus. I've been for narrowband. I like using my filter offsets now so that I can focus with one filter.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, if you're using something like Sequence Generator Pro, you don't have to focus through it.
Right.
And I'd recommend not doing that.
Yeah, because I think, you know, when I tried that, it was, you know, 30-second exposures or something like that. You know, if you're doing that V curve, that's, you know, several minutes of waiting for the focus to complete.
And also get somewhat inaccurate at that point too.
Right.
You can even have temperature slipping within that time frame.
Yeah.
And then the second part of that question, I've been exposing between 60 and 90 minutes for the 3nm O3 filter, and it just depends on your light pollution, really. We did an episode. What was that episode called, Adam? The signal to noise ratio episode, where we discussed narrowband exposures.
Yeah, the math.
We can post a link to that.
Something about the math.
But you want to go as long as you can and get reliably good subs is the real answer, because if you are only going to shoot 5 subs at 90 minutes, then you're probably better off taking twice as many, 10 subs at 45 minutes, so that you can drive down the noise a little bit and stack out any kind of satellite trails or anything like that. But if you don't mind going really deep, then expose as long as you can and get good stars.
Yeah, if your tracking isn't your limit, which we've all done all we possibly can to make sure tracking isn't our limit so we can expose these links. But if tracking isn't your limit, then basically your limit is going to be the thermal stability of your system. And if your focus, if you refocus once every degree drop Fahrenheit, which I do with my SCT, then you have to figure, okay, well, it's going to drop a degree in 30 minutes, or it's going to drop a degree in 20 minutes. So that's kind of one way to look at it. But other than that, I mean, there isn't. If you're going deep, there isn't really a problem with exposing longer. Now we all probably have that number in our head of the number of subs we like to get, anywhere between some people 8, for some 12, for some 16, but those are just a few of the things you'd want to take into consideration.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you like the other said, you want to stay within the mechanical limits of your system. There is a point, where you do start running the same problems with narrowband filters that you would with the wideband, where you're well past the read noise. That's going to be entirely system dependent, and with 3 nanometer filters, it's probably really, really long in the first place. I think I calculated that mine were at something with my current setup, or something about 75 minutes or something like that, where I should get past the read noise limit.
And it's filter dependent too, right? HA will tend to let you go even longer. O3, if you have any light pollution, you can actually hit that read noise limit even on a 3 nanometer filter.
Yeah.
I always wonder, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Bad thing.
Bad thing. Yeah.
Sky noise sucks, especially light pollution.
Yeah, yeah. Well, then it's good to I still want those 3 nanometers, I guess.
Yeah, actually, so there's an interesting topic. Tolga and I chatted today earlier for quite a while about, is there any drawbacks to having all 3 nanometer filters?
Well, cool. We all know the N2 H alpha thing. Well, go. I was just about to say, let me not speak. Go ahead.
Okay, so the one thing that we talked about was that the 5 nanometer hydrogen alpha filter also contains the N2 line in it. So if you go down to the 3 nanometer hydrogen alpha filter, then you remove the N2 from that filter. And what it can do is drive down the signal just a little bit in some of your hydrogen alpha exposures. However, in some of the planetary nebulas, the N2 actually has its own distinct line, so it can create interesting image, like M27 has a very strong distinct line in N2. So if you really like the planetary nebulas, then it would be worth splitting them up. But in general, to get the most signal from your hydrogen alpha filter, the 5 nanometer to me is the way to go.
The other issue with the 3 nanometers is they shift a little bit with faster focal ratio systems. So you start to lose transmission as the bandpass gets shifted off the frequency due to the slope of the light path coming in, right? So they're not recommended, like the Astron 3 nanometer filters. I don't think are recommended for faster than f/3 systems.
Yeah, anything up to f4 is okay, but I think below that, I think that's when the transmission rate really starts to see the drop off.
Yeah.
And then
Go ahead.
One last topic on that, and this is really dependent on where you're at with your imaging, is that your star sizes can start to be affected. So if you have matching bandwidth passes for your O3 and your HA, your O3 stars are likely going to be larger. For me, it's not an issue because I remove the narrowband stars all the time, but if you're somebody who likes to keep your narrowband stars in and you have the same size O3 and HA, then you might get the blue rings around your stars.
One of the other cool things that I don't know, I just find this awesome is if you are using H-alpha to just put some pop into your galaxies, to just get that detail out of the H-alpha regions of the galaxies, using a wider filter, well, let me approach it the other way. If you use a narrow filter, distant galaxies will not have any H-alpha because it'll be it'll be shifted, it'll be redshifted out of the wavelength that the filters are cutting. With a wider filter, there's a little bit more leniency there, and I just think that's kind of cool.
And just to explain that a little further, Adam, do you want to explain why that happens?
Well, yeah. So the farther away the galaxy is, the faster it appears to be moving away from us. So what ends up happening is it's the Doppler effect. The distant galaxy is going farther away, so the wavelength appears to be widening, or the wavelength is widening, or at the point when it hits us. So by widening, it's changing the I don't know whether it's actually changing the wavelength of light, but it's changing the
effective wavelength is changing.
The effective wavelength of light.
It's red shifting, because the only time that really applies, it doesn't apply to any of the big galaxies that we shoot. If you're shooting the Coma or something like that, which is really old, but where everything is kind of, very, very light red or pink. Other than that, I mean, you're not red shifting anything out of HA. And I mean, we shoot 3 nanometer HA all the time on all the galaxies, and it's extremely effective. By the way, I'm a big fan of the 3 nanometer filters compared to the 5s. I've shot them both. I mean, with all the logic that I've heard presented here, I vote for the 3s because it just gives me more signal to noise. There's just no doubt about that.
And Eric, do you want to explain why? Because I agree it does give you a higher signal to noise, and I know why, but do you want to explain why?
Because I'm a nebulosity person, and I want to see smaller stars and more nebula, and those narrower filters give me that. And as far as the 03 and the S2, I mean, I always tone map those out. I don't know if there's an effective way to fairly represent those stars in the sulfur and the oxygen without getting purple rings or rings around them.
And just to explain, Eric, why you get better signal-noise ratio is because you're blocking out more of the...
Because you're looking at the hydrogen emissions as opposed to the broadband light coming from a star, and that's what your emission nebula really are.
As well as light pollution.
Well, sure, absolutely, yeah. That goes without saying, especially when we live in light-polluted areas. But even at the RO, we still have, I mean, the same issue applies. We still like those narrow band filters as opposed to the wider bands, just to get more nebulosity out of those filters. I think it applies no matter where you are. But you're right, light pollution is something you want to get rid of. And that's my 2 cents. Of course, those 3 nanometer filters are not 2 cents. We all know that.
That's why I don't have them. Every time I think I want one, I find I look myself out of spending much money.
Well, when you think a single filter, it runs about the same as a medium price mount. You can certainly have pause.
So we got a couple more questions, Adam. So Devin responded saying, I'm just looking into these faster scopes as we get a wider imaging range, but also these faster scopes has a more optimistic resolution with my Canon. So you'd suggest a smaller refractor to jumping into something like the Quattro Newtonians?
For a beginner, yes. First of all, Newtonians will need collimation. And somebody else, I saw another question about an RC. Similar, RCs will need collimation. SCTs do not require frequent collimation, but do require collimation. But these are all longer focal length systems, and it's just more difficult. A lot more stuff has to go right. So it sounds counterintuitive. Why would I not want as much magnification as possible? But we're not. It's not just magnification. It's magnification relative to the aperture. And it's the reason camera lenses get so fast is because when you're not magnifying much, you don't need much aperture to gather a lot of light. And that's really what we're talking about here. And if you've been watching our program, like over the last few months, we put out some great wide field images. A lot of our image of the days a lot of our image of the weeks have been some wide field images. So some of us may prefer to do some long focal length stuff, particularly if you have dark skies and a giant mount. But at the same time, long focal length stuff gets really expensive because you're chasing problems and you're chasing them with dollar bills in your hand, so maybe $100 bills in your hand. So there's no hard and fast rule, but wide field refractors are just a great way to start. I could tell you a million reasons why, but it's just that's really, I think, one of the commonalities you're going to get if you ask a good astrophotographer what they think. Start with the wide field refractor, figure out what you're doing, figure out your setup, figure out your polar alignment, figure out even your workflow when it comes to processing. Then, when you've done that a few times, you might know you want to get a bigger telescope.
Here's a good point too, right off the bat. I don't know where Devin lives, but if you live on the East Coast, it's very likely, unless you're down like in Florida, that you're seeing doesn't support super high resolution imaging anyway. So if you're trying to shoot at 2,000 millimeters and 0.5 arc seconds a pixel, you might not be able to actually get that. And so it's just going to be an uphill battle anyways. There's I think maybe 2 guys or 3 guys I can think of who shoot over 2,000 millimeters in the eastern half of the United States and do really excellent work on a regular basis, but it's just very challenging. Even your guiding becomes extremely challenging at that point.
Yeah, it's tough when everything's going right and you still have a soft image, and that's seeing. So that's what happens with long focal length setups. And make no mistake, Edge HD 800, that's a long focal length setup if you're over 2,000. So,
Adam, let me just say I agree with you completely, and that's why my 9 1/4 went bye-bye.
Oh, really? Yeah. I almost bought an 11 when I was buying my 8, and I thought, you know what, I'm nuts. Let me just get the 8, and I'm really happy I stuck with the 8 because you don't need much more. You get nice image scale with an 8-inch edge. If you're going for long focal length stuff, you get nice image scale with an 8-inch edge with the focal reducer. So that's pretty much the same thing. And I see, yeah, you're talking about your resolution per pixel of 0.44 arc secs. You're oversampling with your edge. And if you have it right now on your AVX, keep trying, but it's going to come down to getting your polar alignment right. If you're guiding, getting your guiding right. Pick a really bright object. Right now, the dumbbell might be a good one for the Edge AVX because you might be able to get away with 30-second exposures, maybe even a little bit less. Trying to think of some others. But it's a matter of, I mean, you can do it. You just have to... you're not going to be taking 20-minute subs. You're going to be taking 30-second subs if you're not guiding. Maybe 3-minute, 5-minute if you are guiding, and maybe throwing away half of them, depending on conditions or just how well your setup happens to be going that night. Just reading through some questions. I don't see any more new ones. We have gone beyond what we were beyond our typical hour. That's odd for a Q&A. I thought we would be pressed for questions, but I did want to jump over here and just see. I think let's do one question, and then I think we'll probably end it for the night. And Josh, I'm going to pick one of your questions that I like, but I think we can do it relatively quickly. How good does polar alignment have to be? And do you guys quantify your polar alignment? Do you measure your polar alignment in any way, or do you just is it kind of a gut feeling thing for you? And whoever wants to comment can.
Yeah, I use a CCD assisted drift method to do my polar alignment, and generally what I'm looking for is 0 perceptible drift within 4 minutes if I'm going to be doing any kind of long, hour-long exposures or something like that. And the way I do it is, I essentially take an exposure for 65 seconds, I leave the mount alone for 5 seconds, and then slew it at the guide rate west for 30 seconds, and then slew it back for 30 seconds at the guide rate. and that if you're off, it makes kind of a V shape with the ball on one end. You basically close the line to get your polar alignment. And as long as you're getting a line at a 4-minute exposure, then I'm pretty much good. And if I'm doing 5-minute exposures, if I'm in my backyard, then 1 minute of deviation of the line being collapsed is fine there. Right? And generally 1 minute basically gets me within a couple arc minutes of the pole. If I'm doing 4 minutes with my my Edge HD setup, which puts me at about I think it's 0.84 arc seconds per pixel bend with my new camera. That one, 4 minutes will get me somewhere in the order of about I think it's 20 arc seconds, something like that.
I can answer too, and I was actually just talking to Hytham about this. One of my very favorite parts about the Atlas is the polar alignment routine in EQ mod, and as long as you are good about keeping your reticule calibrated to your mount, then you can have a sub 1 minute polar alignment with the alt and as adjustments and the EQ mod polar alignment routine within like 1 or 2 minutes. Of just going through the routine, and I found that to be good enough for up to 90-minute exposures at under 750 millimeter focal length, or maybe even more importantly, at anything that is higher than like 1.2 arc seconds a pixel. So I shoot for that 1 minute of polar alignment error, and when I get that, then I'm good to go for anything I want to do.
Yep, and I use PHD2 drift method, and I basically set it going. I get myself, I have 1 or 2 or 3 iterations before I think I'm close, and yeah, I walk away for 3-4 minutes, and I walk back, and I just want to make sure that my deck is still pinned on that line, and that's basically the way I do it. But it's funny because you want to be well polar aligned, but frequently you don't have to be that well polar aligned. And there is a polar alignment error. I don't want to tell you the wrong name because calculator. It's the maximum polar alignment error calculator. Okay, so if you celestialwonders.com has a maximum polar alignment error calculator, and you can enter all these figures into it, and it'll tell you how well polar aligned you have to be to take exposures of a certain length at a particular declination. So if you're shooting very far north, you have to have much better polar alignment. If you're shooting long focal length, long exposures, very far north, it actually gets really, really difficult, and it's interesting how difficult it gets doing that. But that's a really cool tool to play around with. So, we do not have a session for next week, and I see we've gone for an hour and a half just on an open Q&A. Maybe we have to do more of these because, again, it is tough getting presentations together every week. I think especially in the summer months when, when you can be outside. At least for us Northerners. But I do want to thank everyone for coming. We will have a session for next week. I'll post it in the typical place. Feel free to share your images for the Image of the Week consideration. And beyond that, thanks for coming, and see you next week.